Okay, what's up, chat? We back at it.
Alright.
Like these answers are such a stream.
Current events returns on Friday, right? Who's the
Me and Ariel.
Who's the unlucky,
Unlucky. Unlucky.
Who's Jeremiah working with?
He is working alone.
Who is Jeremiah?
John, we really don't talk like that about people here. He's not even here to not so nice.
Miss Beckman, I left my hoodie in the other room. Can I go get it?
Alright. Alright, so let's see everyone on Google Classroom. Right, so the thing we're working on, we should actually be able to finish today. I think last time you should have done through question 14. Alright, so please, if you're on your phone or something, put it away. No distractions.
Yo, stream, look.
Yo, chat. Is that good?
And you should have done through question 14 last time. Okay, so we were going through and we were really, I guess the most eye-opening thing was trying to read the Palestinian perspective. We had done a lot on the Israeli perspective. And the source we were using was trying their best to be neutral and show us both sides. And they also pointed out that it was like a zero-sum game and hard to find a compromise. Right, so that's sort of where we left it. So by the end of today, we're going to really try to put our heads together and pretend like we're diplomats and try to solve this problem, if that's at all possible. All right, so wait, let's review a little bit. So the Palestinian perspective. What was their side regarding refugees? Like, what were they saying Israel did? What were they asking for Israel to do, to solve it? And please, if I'm going so fast that I need to take like 5 steps backwards and explain something, please say something. There's too many silent people for me to be able to read the silence, right? So if there's something that was not explained or that I need to clarify, please say, I'm not understanding when you say this, whatever. But again, you're supposed to be on assignment 5, right? There's a source page and there's a worksheet. You should have done through question 14 last time. Okay. Alright, so if I open up this, you can cycle through all the things. So right now I'm waiting for some brave person to raise their hand and say something about the Palestinian perspective. What are they saying is the cause of the refugees? What do they want Israel to do to solve this problem? Everyone's going to need to be able to understand this in order to get to the solution. You're not going to be able to finish the worksheet today until you understand both sides and how they are like hitting a brick wall against each other. Okay, Lane.
So from the Palestinian perspective, they believe that the Israelis kicked them out of their homes and they had to look for new homes, and I think I might be getting it confused, but I think they think that a solution could be creating a new homeland for them in Israel, I think, or maybe that was, I don't know, I'm kind of getting confused, but I think, that's the main solution.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, so the Palestinian perspective is, Israel did this to us, the Nakba, Israel kicked us out of our homes, and I guess what you're getting to is they have this thing called the law of return. That's what they want to happen. Right? We spent a lot of time at the law of return, that they want that to be able to be carried out. They cite a UN resolution that gave them this thing called the right of return. And they just want to return. Right? It's not clear where they're returning to.
Is this for 11?
No, I'm just doing a recap before we move on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is an overall takeaway of what we learned, right?
Yeah.
Did you need something repeated from 11? Did you missed answers or something?
Oh, no, I'm up to that. Check.
Oh yeah, we're just doing an overall recap. Right? So anyone, we're just going to put our heads together. We can't just start this week. We haven't had class in a few days, right? So we want to jog our memories, right? So that's what they say. They want the law returned. But what's the Israeli side? So Israel has a different story of how this happened. Israel has a different idea of law of return. You know, why is it that they can't meet in the middle? Okay, Mike.
So Israel thinks that the law of return doesn't, like, it's not binding, and it doesn't necessarily require Israel to allow Palestinian refugees to return. And it would because if they did let all the refugees return, then it would mess up the demographic, and the Jewish majority would be lost.
Right. So Mike, you recapped a lot of good things.
Thanks.
So, and who do they say caused it? Who does Israel say caused it? Everyone should say it. We've been learning this for like 3 weeks or more already. Who does Israel say caused the refugee problem?
Palestinian
Leaders and themselves and the other countries, right? The other Arab countries and all the whole deal, right? That the Arabs caused it themselves. And they started the war. Right? That was Noah Tishby's whole thing. You feel bad for them, but they started the war in the first place. So
we have to
but
end
that
it.
the law of return, not binding, and they have what we call, this is also sort of like clarifying terms, this website is going to call these things identity issues and demographic issues. Right? So Israel has an identity issue with this because it's the Jewish state. And they can't have 7 million of these people returned, then it wouldn't be the Jewish homeland anymore. It would be like a threat to the Jewishness of the Jewish homeland. Right? So the identity issue, and of course the demographic issue, the majority, they would lose the Jewish majority if literally all the people returned. And again, there's the issue of why it's all those people. When originally, what was it, only like 500,000?
Yeah.
And now we're talking about 7 million. Right? I wish it was, if they had the opportunity to just take in the 500,000, maybe they should just do that. Could go back to that. Just end it. Right? But obviously, that's not the goal. I don't think anyone wants to end it. They want it to keep it being a thorn in everyone's side. They want to keep it going. They don't like to end the war. They want it to keep going. So you see that these things don't really meet. Like Elena alluded to a place in the middle. Like maybe there would be a Palestinian state. We've all heard that two-state solution. I mean, when there's violence and wars and Hamas trying to represent people, that's kind of like delays the two-state solution. But then again, maybe that was their goal. Maybe that was Hamas's goal, was to divert the two-state solution and make the world think that they represent the Palestinians when maybe there are other Palestinians who want to be represented in a different way. So that's sort of where we were. Was there anyone who did need something reviewed from 1 through 14? So yeah, we had ended with Abbas had said that he, like, as if he was willing to forego his right of return because he was willing to just visit his childhood place and not like demand that he live right. The fact is that they moved. They have their own community now in the West Bank or wherever they are. So they're not going to literally pick up and move. Then it would be like they became refugees again. Like no one wants to be an immigrant. That's not so easy. Right? So they're settled, but they're claiming they're not settled. All right. So are we ready to go to 15?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So now it's going to get interesting, because now it's going to go into like, I guess the points that would need to happen for this to be resolved. And this first point is what they call the acknowledgement of responsibility. Like the Palestinians want Israel to like come to the diplomatic table and like state their responsibility in words. Okay, so these are our questions to keep in mind. So we're going to try to find the answers to these questions. What do the Palestinians want Israel to do to take responsibility? Why does Israel refuse? And in past negotiations, where were they willing to go to? All right, do we have a reader here? You got it, Mikey?
Palestinians demand an Israeli acceptance of its practical moral responsibility for creating the refugee problem, including acknowledgement of and apology for 1948 events. Israelis categorically reject that reading of history. Furthermore, any recognition of responsibility threatens to undermine the Israeli narrative by implying that Israel was founded in sin and could also carry legal obligations to rectify the situation. These perspectives directly contradict each other and thus far creative formulas have failed to bridge the gap.
Okay, so what do they want Israel to take responsibility for, or?
The 1948 events.
Right, look at this. They want an acknowledgement and an apology. It's gonna get more than that. They're gonna ask for money. Right now, it's saying they want an acknowledgement and an apology for the 1948 events. You know, the Lita and all those things, the expulsions, and not letting people return. As if you do that, you know, it's a war. That the people need to apologize after a war. I don't know if there's precedent for that. But obviously, Israel's not going to go for that. That's too much like Israel would be admitting that they did something wrong at their founding. You know, that's what the in-sin thing's about. So why does Israel refuse to take any responsibility?
Because it would undermine the Israeli narrative.
Yeah, it would be like admitting that Israel was founded in sin, that they, as if they did the wrong thing, that they shouldn't have done that, and it started out negative.
Also, I think like. In a lot of ways, like it's justified. Like most Israelis probably see it that way. But like they didn't do any necessarily. Like look, like there was some lapses of judgment and some moral like infidelity that happened during like the War of Independence on both sides. But that doesn't negate the fact that no one talks about the United States' use of like chemical weapons during Vietnam anymore. Like everyone's moved on from that, and that was like 50 years ago. Like, and that was terrible. Or no one talks about like the thousands of innocent people that the United States killed in Afghanistan because they see it as being justified. But it's holding Israel to such a different standard.
Yeah, it was such a complicated situation, right? They were promised this homeland. The British just like left and like didn't help. And the forces of nationalism and internationalism just fight for survival, right? They had to do what they had to do. Right, for 2,000 years, wanting to come back, and had always been a minority there. They wanted so badly to claim this as the homeland, and that they would be finally the majority in their own home. The other side's now letting go. Okay, past negotiations. Right here. So we're good on 15 and 16. In past negotiations, Israel expressed willingness to do what? So let's look it up. We have a reader for in past negotiations.
Alright, so in past negotiations, Israel has expressed willingness to acknowledge the suffering of Palestinian refugees, but not an Israeli role in that suffering. Israeli leaders have, however, agreed to contribute to an international fund for Palestinian refugees that could symbolically address and perhaps substitute for a recognition of responsibility. Polling suggests that Israelis might be willing to admit partial responsibility for the refugee situation if Palestinians acknowledge their own role in rejecting the partition plan or in fueling Palestinian terrorism. For their part, Palestinians have refused, as they see it, to find themselves responsible for their own tragedy. Another possible compromise could have Israel only acknowledge its role in prohibiting Palestinian refugees from returning after the war, as this is not in dispute. Ultimately, constructive ambiguity could allow both sides to accept language as consistent with their national narratives without alienating the other side.
You see how complicated it is, right? Each side has their like talking points, but they're not able to give up their things that they hold on most dear to. So like meet in the middle. All right. So willing in past negotiations, Israel expressed willingness to acknowledge. What are we writing in there? Acknowledge the suffering of the Palestinian refugees, but not an Israeli role in the suffering. No, so that sounds a lot like what Noah Tishby was doing, right? So she's saying, okay, they suffered a lot, but the Israeli role, there wasn't a blanket expulsion policy. There wasn't this, Israel did not. There was also the Arab leaders, that whole bit. So they're willing to meet there, and they're willing to contribute to a fund for the Palestinian refugees, as if to like symbolically pay reparations or something like that, or a substitution for recognizing responsibility. They would put. Is that putting money where your mouth is? So rather than say the words that they're responsible, they'll just sort of like, give money. Sort of a Jewish idea, right? They're like almost like the korban for when you're guilty, right? Like you give something, like maybe we had something to do with this, but it's so complicated we're not going to take responsibility.
Just go back. Thanks.
Oh, okay. All right, so we're good with 17? Okay. I need to contribute to a fund. All right, so then this was this confusing part here that John was reading to us about the... Okay, so Israel was willing to admit partial, partial responsibility for the refugee situation, but the Palestinians need to take their responsibility for their 2 cents, right? They rejected the partition plan and they're supporting terrorism all these years, right? They're making it very hard to be a negotiating partner of the terrorism going on, right? Like it would be so much simpler if they would just sit down and talk it out. See, it's almost hard to feel bad for people that are inflicting disgusting amount of pain on everyone else. Terrorism. Okay. Alright, so partial response for refugees and their suffering, but not an old, what's the end here? Did anyone else figure out what that was supposed to be?
Like I'm playing an ongoing role.
An active role.
An active role, okay. Okay. And then the Palestinians would have to acknowledge their role in
Rejecting the partition plan.
Right, rejecting the partition plan.
Last participation.
All right, and in fueling
Violence or terrorism.
And Israel would acknowledge its role in prohibiting Palestinians from
Returning to their homes. Ooh, look at these.
Go back, stream.
All right, so which side is more likely to occur? Or
Israel.
You could say Israel doing it. It's kind of an easy thing to do. Yes, and then when Abbas took the money away from the terrorist families, is that his way of moving towards this?
Yeah.
Maybe it is. Maybe they're aware of these things.
Yikes.
Wait, Miss Piper, is there anything you could scroll up a little bit? I just like this one.
Amit, what are you doing? Pick up your feet, you're dragging. Pick up your feet, please.
What does that mean?
When you walk, you're dragging your feet. Pick them up.
Oh, I got that.
It's not good for you.
Alright, so are we good through 8? Anyone need anything repeated through 18? John, you're good now?
Yeah.
Alright, so these are just opinion questions, right? So do you think that they have really spent time on these compromises in negotiation? And if both sides spent time on these compromises 30 years ago, do you think that the current situation would still be happening? It's just so maddening, like, to think that, like, maybe they found themselves face to face at a table and they could have discussed this, but the tendency is just to avoid these conversations. Is that no one wants to say the side that goes against what their people represent. But meanwhile, in walking away from the table and just leaving the status quo, which is like this like awkwardness in the air between literally neighbors, it just leaves these people to just tend to violence every few years, right? Like every decade or two, it's like this just look, peace, violence. Like that's just how it's been for so long. But because they're more comfortable with just leaving the status quo than to sitting down at the table and ironing these things out. And it just gets harder and harder every decade, because now we're not just talking about the children of the refugees, now it's the grandchildren of the refugees. And this is just how they grew up, this is their world. They grow up like literally hating Israel and hating Jews, and they don't know what happened back then. And they're not developing a vision for a future place. It just keeps festering. Anyone want to share anything they're writing for 19? Just form an opinion. Don't be afraid to form an opinion.
I wrote probably not enough time. Like they have been discussed, but like there's continues to be like mistrust and like between like the two sides, and like that kind of like stops them from like fully agreeing to compromise. Because like each side also has different like fears, like, oh, if they do this, then this will happen to us. Yeah. It could like weaken their state.
I think they kind of just like say compromises to like
Thanks,
have
man.
compromises.
Thanks.
Like it almost sounds like they're like placeholders to like they can think like, oh, like if we ever need it, this can happen. But I don't think like it's actually something seriously like set in stone. I think it's just to have to make them feel better and to say that like we have a compromise, but I don't think it's an actual compromise.
I think there's been, because of all of like the current situation that's going on and like all of the feud that like the current feud and the current fighting, that's not really like the government's really like top priority. Like they're not really looking towards like what compromise can we make soon. It's more like how can we stop what's going on now, and then after. Yeah, I know, but still, like that's what I was kind of.
This is like on the agenda from before all this, but.
Yeah.
You know, even this morning there was an attack in the Haifa bus station.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be like, it sounds like it's like a lone wolf guy. Like it just, there's a Druze who had German citizenship, and he hadn't been to Israel in months or even years. Just came back and started stabbing people randomly at the Haifa bus station. And one of the Knesset members, who's Jews, just, you know, condemned the attack and pointed out also that it doesn't represent his people either. Usually the Druze are very loyal to Israel, wherever they live. But he was saying that, you know, this is a person who was living abroad, and came back to do this violence, senseless violence. So that not only are there like the expected things going on in the West Bank right now and the terrorist sweeps that they're doing, but now there's these random lone wolf things that there's been a few of these recently. Which complicates the whole thing. All right.
I think it's crazy how much like that's not like talked about that much. That like it's still like a normal thing.
We're so desensitized.
Yeah, it's like oh yeah, someone like you hear yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, it's just not something that like would happen here. If that would happen here, it would have been like all over the place. I feel like. Not in the city, but the cities.
Okay.
Couldn't agree more.
Now the war is just distracting everyone from what this is obviously the underlying issue behind why the war keeps going on. All right. So that was the responsibility piece. Now we're going to go to the identity issues piece. The identity issues piece. How are we going to deal with this? Right? Is there even any way? All right. So we're going to look at this. Yes, you just have to decide if you agree or disagree with the statement and what part to ring true today. Right. Israeli and Palestinian leaders have largely deferred identity issues in negotiations in order to address the more practical concerns. Right? There is little political will to address issues of rights and responsibility, and the parties may have better success in resolving them in a post-conflict environment. On the other hand, resolving the issues now could build trust for tackling other issues, while deferring identity issues could weaken an agreement in the long term and allow hatred of the other side to fester. Wow. And this is like we were just saying this, right? Ultimately, to achieve an agreement, compromises will have to be made by both sides, but Israelis and Palestinians have expressed that an effective response to identity issues could allow more flexibility on the practical issues of the conflict. All right, so do we agree or disagree? All right, it's sort of like what we were just talking about regarding the, okay, just do it now, or just let it hang out and, we'll get to it later. But if you defer it, is that going to weaken things in the long term? And is that going to allow the hatred to fester? Or is that even what happened with October 7th? Or, was that because it was ignored? Because this issue had been ignored for decades. Did that allow the hate to fester and to explode? For even Hamas to be a thing, right? It used to be Arab nationalism. Now it's this twisted fundamentalist Islamic thing mixed with Arab nationalism. Anyone want to share what they're writing for question 20?
Again, like I think the problem is I'm having trouble to say it like now. Right now, I don't think that there's like any issues that like identity issues are I don't think the priority, and they shouldn't be the priority because right now it's the safety of the people in Israel. So I think like right now it couldn't work, but I think before we can have an agreement in the long term, there has to be like resolving identity issues.
I guess the same thing you would find if you had an argument with your neighbor at home, right? Some people argue with their neighbor and they want to resolve it right away. Some people just like, I don't want to talk to him anymore. You just like have this awkward relationship with the neighbor. Like every time you see them, like, but then it could get worse. And then 5 years later, their kid's egging your house on Halloween, and it goes down the tubes, right? Like because it was never addressed. It just got worse or something. I mean, they're neighbors. No one's going to click their heels and the other one's not going away. So just to let it hang and not deal with these things, and then decades go by and generations go by, and and the education program is teaching that they're the evil demons, like that's really bad, right? So it was just like ignored. It's almost like the sin of ignoring. That's what somehow is like part of this whole equation. We criticize the Arabs for not going to the negotiating table like all those decades, but I think the Israelis also didn't want to go because they knew that if they went, they'd have to address the refugee issue, and no one wanted to deal with it. So they just let things be for so long, and then the hatred became this morphed evil of today. Like they weren't dealing with this back then, the bus bombings and stuff in the 70s and 80s. It became bigger like the 90s. They were just throwing rocks in the 1980s. They hadn't yet gotten to bombs and bus bombs. That was not so like 2001. Rockets. They were just shooting rockets. And we got used to that too, right? Like I was reading this thing like your Den Bibas before October 7th, like the week before, like Scrolly, his mother like wrote a diary entry of like her last conversations with him before the war, and he had like some sense or some feeling that something was going to happen soon. He couldn't figure it out, but then again, that was their life there. Like they were so used to the rockets, like they always had a sense that something was going to happen. It wasn't probably even out of the ordinary. They always probably thought something. You learn to live with those rockets. And then that. All right, so we go to number 20. And the idea of letting it fester can be bad. All right, so now we're going to get to some of the solutions that could be. All right. All right, so if there is a resolution, they're going to give them a pathway to permanent residence or citizenship, and then once they become citizens, they won't be refugees anymore. But will they have a choice in their place of residence? That's something. Now, well, take a look at this map, by the way. The first time I saw this, I couldn't believe the numbers. Obviously, I knew about the Gaza Strip, but I knew about the West Bank. But did you know that there's this many, like these people are living in Lebanon, but like in camps, and they're not integrated into Lebanon. And these people are living in Syria as Palestinians. They're not integrated into Syria. They're just in refugee camps. And these people in Jordan, they're just Palestinian refugees living in Jordan, not integrated into Jordan. That's where you get the 7 million from.
If you've never been to like the country that you're a refugee of, then like obviously something's wrong. Like I'm sure, like those people are like probably grandchildren of original Palestinians that left. So like if I'm sure like none of them have actually been to the West Bank or been to Gaza. Like,
yeah. So like the first time I saw this website, I used to think that the refugees were the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. I didn't realize that there are all those other people too. It's almost like more of them are living abroad than in there. Right? And it's so maddening. You've already moved away. Just like what can we even make a comparison to? Like, is that like the Native American reservations? But the Native American reservations, I feel like they choose to be on those reservations to maintain their culture, right? Like they have certain services, I guess, from the U.S. government. But like I think they're often choosing to just maintain their culture on the reservation. They probably could integrate if they wanted to. But these people are made to stay in these camps and fester their hatred against Israel. But they're not allowed to integrate into their home state because they're refugees. So it's sort of a maddening situation. All right, so these are the solutions. And in a few questions from now, you'll have to decide which one is your best solution, your favorite solution. So one solution is what's called repatriation. And that means to let them go, like return, but to a Palestinian state. I think the video had alluded to that solution before too. So like they wouldn't be returning to Israel, so it wouldn't affect this whole complaint about the identity and the Jewish majority, because they wouldn't have to mix into Israel. They would just return, but get their own state. Maybe some right? It says like some refugees, like a small number or something that they'd have to agree on, could go to Israel proper. Or maybe land would be traded in a land swap to the Palestinian state from Israel to the Palestinian state, some sort of concession. But then they would have citizenship in a Palestinian state, and then that would end this whole thing. They just have to have citizenship in a Palestinian state. And then I guess with the people in the Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan, when they then move there, that's what they're talking about. Would there be a rapid immigration from those 3 sets of camps in the 3 other countries, and would that strain the economies in all the countries? If they had to rapidly migrate to this new Palestinian state so that they wouldn't be refugees anymore. And that's what this is. So like the light green is the 97% of the West Bank. And then the dark green would be land that they'd annex to give them, I guess, a 3% land swap that they would owe or something to make it more even. I don't know how to calculate all that. So that's what repatriation is talking about. Yeah.
I remember that.
So if we so why would Palestinians support this?
Because they would like gain their independence and have a state.
Yeah, they would have states, gain their independence. But what might be the risk in repatriation?
It could become like a terrorist state like Gaza.
Okay. So could we look at what happened in 2005 as a mistake of the past if they like let them have their independence? Terrorists. And also said that there could be a risk in having too rapid of immigration, right? Like a rapid immigration would cause a strain on the economy. Because if they're saying, like, of the 7 million, only 3 million are already in the West Bank Gaza, which means like somewhere like 3 to 4 million are abroad. So like 3 to 4 million people would need to be like brought in to then move into the West Bank, which is already sparsely populated because it's all mountainous and right. Do they even want to live there? It seems like all mountainous. The Jews are only in a small piece of the West Bank, and that's what makes it also kind of strange that they're always arguing over it. It's more of a defensive land for the Jews, for Israel, because of the mountainous region. All right, so now it says the second option is return. All right, should we have a reader read here, past negotiation? Okay,
Return. In past negotiations, Israeli and Palestinian representatives debated a limited return of Palestinian refugees into Israel. This issue is most contentious due to the Israeli concern that Palestinian immigration could upend Israel's demographic balance and threaten its future as a Jewish state. Therefore, Israel has demanded an upper unit to heavily constrain the magnitude of refugee return and avoid any long-term or open-ended commitment. However, for the Palestinians, any number, especially if it is too low, might conflict with the principle of giving the Palestinians a choice in exercising the right of return. In practice, Israeli negotiators have hardened their positions over time, from agreeing to absorb 40,000 refugees in 2001 to lower numbers in 2008, and ultimately rejecting any absorption today. Palestinian positions have also varied over the rounds of negotiation between 80,000 and 300,000. Other options raised over the years include setting an annual rate of refugee return for an indefinite period, which was rejected by Israel, or a link between the number of refugees to Israel and the number of refugees resettled in third countries. Still, others have proposed linking the number of refugees absorbed by Israel to the number of Israeli settlers who could be permitted to remain in the new Palestinian state. Some suggest that there is currently a narrow window of opportunity for compromise, so long as a few thousand ritual Palestinian refugees still live. An Israeli recognition of the right of return for first-generation refugees born before 1948 could provide a meaningful resolution of the refugee issue, indeed an unprecedented breakthrough, without jeopardizing Israel's Jewish majority. Lastly, there is disagreement over how to characterize refugee absorption to Israel. Palestinians demand the symbolic terminology of return, while Israel insists on language of humanitarian gestures and family reunification. Negotiators have explored how ambiguity in agreement language could help bridge differences, though it could prove counterproductive once the agreement were subject to public debate.
Alright, so this is the idea of return. Alright, so Israel demands an upper limit to the number of refugees because why they want to limit them?
Because they want to make sure it remains Jewish.
Yeah, they want to still protect the Jewish majority, right? The Jewish majority. And they were saying, they were saying that their limit is 40,000. They won't let them back more than 40,000. But over time, their number of 40,000 is it tending to increase or decrease?
Increase.
Israel's upper limit?
Oh no, it's decreasing.
Decrease, right? They said that in 2001 they were going to let 40,000, but then it's seeped down to like 0 now. Now they're like, no one can come back, right? So now over time it's decreasing. But the Palestinians, what's their issue?
Giving Palestinians choice and exercising the right of return.
And any number, especially if it's too low, might conflict with the principle of giving them a choice. Right,
Oh, yeah.
exactly. That's what you're saying, right? So because you're only going to give a choice to that small number. Everyone else is like, no, so, it doesn't give them choice. Over time, the Palestinian number is going to. Over time, they're going to want more people or less, right? They want more, so they want to increase their number. Israel wants to decrease the number. You see how the compromise is not really meaning. Okay. And then Lena brought up the idea of what if they say, okay, no more of this intergenerational thing. No more second generation, no more third generation, no more fourth generation. Let's go back to those first generation ones. Why don't we just let in some of them? Right? What a novel idea, right? So what do we think? Is that a good compromise? To just let them, but then, they're getting this number of 914,000. I feel like everywhere else I read was like 500,000. I don't know where they got the number of 940,000. But even so, it's not 7 million. So would they or should they go back to that? Like if Israel had some sort of opportunity to actually make a big step towards ending this conflict, and all they had to do was let in these people, who are probably really over are still really Many refugees currently live in camps. Funding would likely be needed. So in other words, the rest of the world would need to give funding to neighbors are currently hosting. Okay. Which are the countries that are hosting the refugees?
Jordan.
Right, Jordan had like 2 million, right? And
Lebanon.
Lebanon and
Syria.
Syria. Right, so those countries. There's the maps on the page. Oh, here's the map. Right, remember these guys are host 500 something thousand, 600 something thousand, 2.2 million. Oh my goodness. telling you how to come up well, we're talking about today. I wouldn't want anyone to leave this blank to this confusing. Right? So it's just saying, like, you have the numbers? I know. Like, what you know, so, you know, the easy thing, I think, would just, these people should probably just integrate what they are. Otherwise, you'd have to move 3.5 million people to the West Bank. You might as well have them integrate what they already are. And then that just leaves you the West Bank and Gaza, so they get two states, and what do you have to do to quiet them down and say, and put those keys away? Put the keys away.